This episode is brought to you by Dick Dyer Mercedes-Benz, the first Mercedes-Benz in South Carolina.
Hey, I'm David Koffitz. We're the Cola Guys podcast here. George is unable to join us today, but we are super excited to have two people with us. They are the co-hosts of South Carolina's hottest political podcast, Bourbon in the Backroom. Good afternoon, gentlemen. Vincent, Joel, y'all want to say hello today?
Great. Yeah, I'm Joel Lourie. It's a pleasure to join you, David.
And this is Vincent Sheheen. David, we're excited to not be the host of a podcast, but instead be the guest.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a labor of love, is it not?
It really is. We have such a blast with our podcast, Bourbon in the Backroom, and it's fun to see a podcast focused around an industry in South Carolina like you're having, related to real estate and all the excited things that are happening here.
Yeah, well, David, I do need to ask you though. I assume that we were supposed to get a case of bourbon delivered. Maybe is the truck out? Should we go ahead?
Careful, he's going to ask you for a house, Joel.
Yeah,
that's right. I'll take a house as opposed to some bourbon. Yeah.
Well, we may have to take a pass on the bourbon today since my co-host, who's not with us, is just 19, just to keep it legal.
Good idea.
Yeah. But Joel and Vincent are former state senators and former members of the House of Representatives. You guys are the co-hosts behind the scenes of what has become a super hot political podcast here in the Southeast. As the way it was described to me, you guys take a behind the scenes look at the important, funny, and sometimes strange world of South Carolina government and politics.
That's true.
Yeah. So, Vincent, why don't we start with you? Why don't you give us a little bit of your background and tell us, just tell our listeners who you are.
Yeah, sure. I'm happy to. Thanks again, David, for having us on the show. So I'm from Camden, South Carolina, grew up here. My family's been here for several generations. They were Lebanese immigrants back in the late 1800s, went to high school, went to Clemson University, and then went to USC for my law school. So it's interesting to have both the orange and the garnet in the family. And then I came back to Camden, worked as an attorney, where I still work as an attorney in a law firm that actually does a lot of real estate practice. I don't do much of it, but our firm handles a lot of residential real estate closings and commercial real estate. Ran for did a lot of other things, but ran for the House of Representatives when I was 29, was elected from a small town rural district that really a Democrat or a Republican could have a chance to win, which is something that Joel will tell you doesn't exist much anymore in South Carolina. Yeah. Joined the House. Joel was there with a bunch of other young, interesting people who were Democrats and Republicans. We had a good time. We'll talk more about that. And I was elected to the Senate in 2004 when I was, I think, 31, served there for about 16 years, had a blast, got to work on a lot of issues, including many real estate issues, the gas tax issue, 4K, the Confederate flag, lots of things. And interestingly, David, during that time, I really began to be interested in real estate. And my family, we started a small real estate investment company. So we own a number of properties, commercial, single-family dwelling, redevelopment properties in Richland, Kershaw, Lancaster counties primarily, and that's been a lot of fun. And so, I've been involved in it directly as well in real estate. So that's a quick skinny on me. I've got an amazing wife who I've been married to for more than 2 decades and 3 boys, one of whom is a real estate agent and attorney, and one of whom manages our real estate business over here in Camden.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Vincent. Joel, how about you, sir?
Kind of really similar to my friend Vincent. Both of us grew up in families that were very involved in public service, but I'm a native of Richland County, have lived here all of my 61 years, with the exception of 1 year. I went to the University of Georgia my freshman year, and they asked me to leave. That's not a joke.
We won't ask why. We won't ask for all the reasons.
Yep. My brother came to stay with me for about 4 or 5 days, and he said, "Do you ever go to class?" I said, "No." But anyway, born and raised, Vince and I like to tease each other because, we're best friends. In many ways, we're polar opposites. He grew up in a rural county. I grew up just a kid of the suburbs, but was very involved in community service and politics through my dad. who served Isidore Lourie for 28 years in the House and the Senate, and have always been in business. I run a insurance brokerage in the Southeast. It's called Lourie Life and Health. Very active in the health insurance and Medicare space. Very busy this time of year. And decided to take my own jab at running for public office back in 1998, after being involved in several elections, both local and statewide, for friends of mine, and got lucky, beat an incumbent in again, kind of like Vincent's district. My district at that time, I'm a moderate Democrat, was a very Republican district, and served for 6 years in the House, and then ran for the Senate and won in 2004, and served for another 12 years in the Senate. So for a total of 18 years, really enjoyed my service, but never wanted to make a career out of it. Vincent and I have this debate about term limits all the time. But, really gave me an opportunity to learn a lot more about my state, but most importantly, give back to the state and focus on issues that I care about: public safety, healthcare for seniors and children, education, things like that. And just, decided in 2016 was time to get back to my business and, more importantly, my family, and haven't looked back one iota since then. I've had a lot of fun doing these podcasts with my buddy Vincent, and we'll talk a little bit about how we got into that in a few minutes. It looks like Vincent's camera was working for a second there.
It looks like he's finding it. Yes.
Yeah. There you go. Yeah, that on button does amazing things, brother.
Well, Austin just walked in and he just magically touched it, and now it's working. So here I am.
There you go.
Awesome. Well,
That's my producer.
Glad you could join us now.
So, by the way, David, you see all those awards on his wall there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So I used to have that too, and then when I moved in this new office, I chose not to. I had just that was it, But
they're in the attic like my uncle, right?
Yeah. Didn't you get the locksmith award one year?
Yeah, that's my favorite award.
Yeah, that's
Legislator of the Year award for the locksmith.
That's really impressive, dude.
Well, one of the things that is impressive about both of you and your careers in politics is that you both got started at a very young age. We don't see a lot of young people engaging in state or local politics at that age. So, for both of you, what was the driver to get involved, at such an early point in your lives?
So, I think they were a little bit different, really. Joel was very active, as he mentioned, growing up and in college. I actually took the other path. I wanted nothing to do with it. My family was very involved in government and politics, like Joel's, but I was the guy that didn't want anything to do with it. Came back to Camden, and in a small town like this, you get involved in everything if you're in a profession. And so, I got drafted to be on the educational tech nonprofit over here. I got drafted to serve on the junior leadership board for the county. Just a lot of these things. I was a prosecutor for the city of Camden part-time. And when the House seat came open, I just felt involved, and I felt like I could do as good a job as anybody else. And I saw a lot of the needs in the town and the county, and I wanted to do it. So I jumped in. And I would say, David, it takes a certain amount. I think we ought not to shy away from this. It takes a certain amount of ego to think when you're 29 you can do this kind of thing. But it also takes a certain amount of interest. And I think what worries me today is that younger people are so turned off by government and politics and what they see. They have just as big egos as we did. That hasn't changed. But the interest level perhaps has. And I think that's a worrisome trend. And when I was younger, maybe it had changed somewhat, but we still thought that this was a very honorable and that we owed it to our country and our state and our community to serve. Joel, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree with that, Vince. That was well said. And I'll do those in reverse, because I do think that Vincent and I both came from, his uncle was Speaker of the House, and very prominent member of the legislature, and still enjoy spending time with him when I get to see him. And, we both grew up thinking politics was a way to bring people together to solve problems. And, I'd like to think that in the 18 years I was there, and the 22 years that you were there, Vincent?
20. Yeah.
20 years. We got things done by working across the aisle, David. I mean, that's who, some of our best friends and some of our greatest work was pulling people together and let's figure out where we can find some common ground and move a piece of legislation forward. Vincent, I don't know that we could still enjoy that success in today's environment, but I got interested the same way. I grew up, my dad was interested in politics going all the way back to his hometown of a little town called St. George, South Carolina. And so, from the time I was a kid, I was, have to wear these stupid little styrofoam hats, and go out and hand out flyers and stuff. But I really got a bug for it. And, I really saw it as a way to give back to the state. It wasn't about, you're looking at two guys who probably lost a lot of money serving in the public, because we weren't there to make a name for ourselves or to try to make money off of our positions. We were there really to try to get things done. And it took a tremendous commitment and sacrifice away from our family and our businesses. Wouldn't trade it for the world, but also wouldn't go back for the world, if you know what I mean.
Oh, absolutely. When I moved back to Columbia about 3.5 years ago, one of the first persons I got to meet through the Greater Remote Chamber of Commerce, where I've become very involved, was Chip Huggins.
Oh, we love Chip.
And I've not heard one person say a negative thing about him. And so really, and he says the same thing about you guys. And Chip, was one of those folks that, talked about being able to reach across the aisle and do business. I've not heard that same comment about this, current class of legislatures, and that's sad to see. So it seems like, the folks that you guys came up through the House of Representatives into the Senate with just had a lot of class, a lot of decorum. You could work with each other, and now that seems to be, bleeding away, unfortunately.
David, I would never say anything. I've known Chip Huggins since college. He used to work at our family department store, Lourie's department store. Great guy. He's with the University of South Carolina. I would never say anything negative about him. But I will tell you this, we legislators have a postage budget today because of Chip Huggins. Because you could see Chip, I'm not kidding you, I'd bump into him at the concession stand at Williams-Brice Stadium, and 2 days later I'd say, "Dear Senator Lourie," I'd get a letter. "It was a pleasure seeing you at the concession stand at Williams-Brice Stadium."
Chip loved to he is a people person. And David, you're right though, and I want your listeners to know it's still better at the state level. Republicans and Democrats still talk much more than at the national level, but it is getting more like the national level, and that's the worrisome trend.
Well, that's a shame, but so let's shift gears, because really George and I wanted to have you on here to talk about your podcast. So whose idea was this? Who sat down and said, "Hey, I've got time to kill every week. Let's produce an hour-long show and spend time getting people on there to talk about what's going on in our state to inform our electorate."
I'll let Joel tell you that story.
Oh, okay. So shortly after the 2020 elections, my friend Vincent Sheheen calls me, and we were all in a state of shock because, although it was the 2020 elections, David, were really a national election. So blue states voted blue and red states voted red.
Yes, sir.
So if you were in a purple to red district, your district went very red. If you were in a purple to blue district, your district went very blue. Unfortunately, my buddy Vincent is in a purple to red district. And, I'm not saying this because he's a good friend of mine, but between he and Representative Funderburk, those two work so hard to do so many things for Kershaw County. But politics, if you've listened to our podcast, we talk a lot about that, has gotten so national that he and State Representative Funderburk just got caught up in that national wave. And in his district, it was a very strong Republican vote. So he calls me up about a month or two afterwards. And he says, "I want to run an idea." We talked business. We talked about our business, my business, his business. He says, "I want to run an idea by you, but it's not one that's going to make us any money." I said,
David knows that.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm not interested, but for the sake, humor me. So he comes up with this idea and says, "Let's do a podcast." Journalism today at the State House, and it's the journalists that are there are hardworking, but they're stretched very thin. And when his uncle and dad and my dad were involved in state government, you probably had on any given day 40 or 50 reporters from around the state and radio stations covering state house news. And now you probably have 10. and he felt like there was an opportunity to tell an inside story. So, we kind of went back and forth with some ideas. I said, let me think about it. I want to talk to some friends of mine, talk to some folks in my business, because I don't want to do anything to that would ever kind of partisanize my business. But then we said, all right, let's give this a try. It sounds kind of fun. So then the question was, what are we going to call it? And, we're going to call it Under the Dome. And, we kind of kicked that around, but that sounded too much like Meet the Press. So we were going to call it The Backroom. We're going to call it The Backroom. And then Vincent's son and his roommate, and they were like, no, you can't call it that. That's where people go to buy porn on the internet. And I'm like, oh, hell no.
That's why we have some younger people helping produce the podcast, David.
Yeah.
So we said we definitely don't want that. So then we came up with Bourbon in the Backroom. And, the first couple of episodes, we were kind of getting used to it, but we've had a great time with it. And what's really cool, Vincent, is some of the guests we brought on, right?
It is. And just a couple other points about the formation of it, and then we'd love to talk about the show more. Normally, when I do a project like this, whether it is, passing major legislation, working outside the state house to bring a message, I always try to partner with a Republican. That's just what I did. And Joel frequently did that. And that was my instinct in this. And the more I thought about it, and this is important for people that want a podcast, I realized I needed someone that I had just a natural banter with, that it was easy to talk to, who wasn't exactly like me. And Joel and I are pretty different. We have a lot of similarities, but also a lot of differences. And so it just came to me, who is different from me, and yet I think we could play off each other really well and have fun doing it. And it was Joel. And I think that's the key. If you don't have people that get along and can talk, other listeners can sense that. So that was really important. And then also when we put this together, we didn't have any clue what we were doing. and my son had been a professional video gamer for a while, whatever that is, before he got his realtor's license. And then his friend is really good on tech and actually mixes and makes music. And so, they got us started, and we didn't know how to do it. We just got in a room and talked. They really got us started. They made it work. So I think that's the other thing, is finding people that can make it happen was really important.
That's awesome. I completely agree and understand the whole process of like trying to find or figure out who's a good co-host to work with, because if you don't and you two have just a really great dynamic on the show. I mean, it just, one of you stops, the other picks up. And it just goes. And
David, the other thing was, we had to have a goal, and our goal really was, I think, twofold. One was to actually let listeners know that Democrats and Republicans and independents can work together. And so we strive on our show, and we have since the beginning to have all of those voices on the show. And we also have them together where they can talk together and show they can work together. And then secondly, like Joel said, very few people have a clue of what's going on in their own state government, even though it really affects them more than the federal government. And so we wanted listeners to be able to understand what's happening. So those are really the two goals of the show.
Well, that's great. And our goal to have you guys on is just, as I mentioned before we got started, there's so many people that, as a realtor, that we work with that are moving here from out of state. You want to be able to say, look, if you want to know what's going on in the state, listen to this podcast. This is the place to go if you can't find it in print media. So early on, how did you guys kind of figure your way through this, and what topics were important, or how to segment up the show to make it interesting for you guys?
So I'll take a stab at that, and then Joel can follow up, because Joel has he's a better showman than Vincent is, truthfully. So really,
Joel is funnier than Vincent. Vincent is boring. I mean, you ask Vincent, hey, did you watch that show? Did you see any of that game last night? He goes to bed at 7:30. He reads books about like King George. I mean,
so I take the policy stuff, and Joel is really good at the politics stuff of it. But if you listen to the first shows, like, you can tell. I mean, the first couple shows, truthfully, we just talked and talked and talked. Over time, that developed into segments, and I give Joel credit for that. We have an opening segment called Bourbon Briefs that was Joel's idea, which is brief updates on what's happening in politics and government. Then we have a guest, and again, we have Republicans, Democrats. Sometimes we'll have non-elected officials, but our core focus is on the state legislature.
Yeah.
And then we have just a closing where we just talk about the guests and kind of what's happening. We do like to get comments. I think it's always fun when you have emails or messages from people. We like to talk about those on the show. Joel, I mean, what's your thoughts on how it's developed? Isn't it a lot different show now than it was the first 6 months, probably?
It is, and I think a lot of that's just me, Vincent, you and me being comfortable with our back and forth, which we've done.
Yeah.
I mean, Vincent and I were desk mates for 12 years. So I had to clean up a lot of his mess in the Senate. So this was nothing new.
Yeah, like he'd say, "What's this bill about again?"
Took out a vote, right? But I also give a lot of credit to the people that have helped us. A young lady that works in my office, who's a dear friend of mine, Holly Van Horn, is our director. She pulls everything together a day or two in advance. So Vince and I have a chance to review headlines from around the state, a biography of our guests, even some questions. Vincent's son, Austin, and his roommate in college, in law school, Austin Sheheen, Campbell Douglas, do a great job of assembling it. And then there's another young guy here in the office, Jonathan, who just is the recording guy and sends the audio. So it makes our life a lot easier. I think one of the things that also, Vincent, I have a lot of people tell me, is that they really enjoy, we go around and pick up in our Bourbon Brief section, David, we pick up about 3 fun audio clips from the week.
Yes,
it could be Tim Scott or Nikki Haley saying something. It could be something that happened on the floor of the House or the Senate. I mean, it's all South Carolina. The only time we get into national politics is when we're talking about our South Carolinians running for president. And we play those clips and a lot of people go, God, I really never heard that story, So it's just come together nicely. It amazes me.
This episode of The Coal Guys is sponsored by Bell Carrington, Price & Gregg. Bell Carrington is our choice for the best real estate attorneys in town. They are highly communicative and make sure that the closing process is as smooth as possible. With offices in North Carolina, South Carolina, Tennessee, Georgia, and Alabama, they can handle any of your real estate, finance, eminent domain, financial services litigation, and litigation needs. Call their Columbia SC office today at 803-509-5078.